Would you like to be a more effective leader? This is just one of the topics that we talked about today on the Happier at Work podcast. I'm your host, Aoife O'Brien, and my guest today is Brandon Laws from the Transform Your Workplace podcast. A fantastic podcast. If you haven't listened, definitely go and check it out. We cover lots of different areas, but really one of the key takeaways for me is you cannot outsource leadership. You have to, if you're in a leadership position, you have to become a more effective leader. And I don't think the journey is ever ending. I think we are constantly looking to improve ourselves. So we have a conversation about how to be a more effective leader, among many other things, like how the workplace has evolved and how there's much more of a focus on well-being of employees. So you need to take care of your employees. Definitely let me know what's one thing that you took from today's episode. I always love hearing from listeners. Don't forget to share it with a friend or a colleague who you think might benefit. And do leave a rating or a review on your favorite platform. Brandon, you're so welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. I know we've been talking about doing this for a while, so it's an absolute privilege to have you on the show. I'm a huge fan of your podcast. Do you want to let people know a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you got into doing what you're doing today?
Thanks, Aoife. It is my pleasure to be on your podcast. And we have been talking for a while about doing this, and it's so nice to finally be on your show. My name is Brandon Laws. I am Vice President of Marketing and Product at Xenium HR. We're like this regional human resource and payroll company. We help like small, medium-sized organizations with mostly HR, but payroll processing, benefits administration, like all the things that people hate doing. Like the businesses hate the administration of like the payroll and the benefits, and then we can wrap around an HR person and support. So my career, I've grown up through that organization. I started like in an operations role back in 2008, and before that I did a short stint in insurance sales, which was sleepless nights for me, and I just not a fit. And before that was college. So I've had this really interesting linear career, like where I was able to have these opportunities to grow inside of Xenium, and I love what we do. We always say like we're transforming workplaces, and so back in 2012, I started a podcast, and I called it Human Resources for Small Business podcast. There was
Oh, I didn't
not a lot
know
of
that it was called
yeah,
something
so
different.
yeah, so this is I was a big fan of podcasts. Like they were starting to kind of come out, like the
Yeah,
Apple
2012
Podcasts
is, that's a
existed
long time ago. Yeah.
long time, and I listened to a podcast called Econ Talk and some sports podcasts that were out there, and then I like a real estate I was real into real estate investing type information. I'm not doing it, but I'm like I was
Just
wanting to do it.
listening
So
to
like
other people. Is it like watching
yeah,
those TV
exactly.
shows
It,
about the
yeah,
million-dollar homes in New York and things like that?
it's like I can't afford that, but I'm like I'm interested in the content.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where I'm like I saw the framework in which they were interviewing like these experts, and I'm like I could totally take this to the HR industry, because what I felt with like the business we were in was that for many HR professionals, they probably saw Xenium as a threat in a lot of ways. Like, oh, we can be your fully outsourced HR department. Where I'm like, actually, we can wrap around you. HR job is very hard. You've got to be. It's like I'm in a marketing role. It's like I can't be good at everything marketing related. There's websites to build. There's like you got to write code. You've got to do social media. There's all these things that
Yeah.
we've got to do that I just can't possibly be good at. So I hire consultants to wrap around me and fill in the gaps. HR is no different. Like so I created that podcast for educational purposes for HR people. Um, at some point, I changed it to Transform Your Workplaces, which is the title today. And I've been doing this for a very long time. And we have like conversations with expert authors and speakers and HR professionals about various topics about impacting the workplace in a positive way. So it's one thing that I do in my job, as I have a big job, but it's my most passionate thing that I do. I
Yeah.
love having conversations.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people think I can relate so much to what you're saying in relation to you're like marketing, it has this and it has this. I'm
Yeah.
realizing that as an entrepreneur, I'm not just the marketer, I'm the
You're
everything.
everything.
I'm the everything
Yes.
person. And within each individual area, if one thing goes wrong, so I had an issue with my website last week, which took up days to fix. I mean, days of trying to
Just
figure
call
out
your friend
what's going
Brandon.
on.
He knows how to do
Hey, Brandon. Hey,
it.
Brandon, fix my website. But then there's the marketing, and there's all of the different aspects that you have. And within each of the buckets, there's just more and more
Oh,
buckets
yeah.
and the tasks that go with every. Yeah, I'm realizing this. So I'm going to get better at outsourcing this year. All of the stuff that I don't want to do or can't do myself, or
I
just don't
mean, we
have the
get
time to do.
like, right. We got to think about this in our businesses and in our personal lives. Is like, what do I love to do? What am I really good at? And then what can somebody else do who's better, or just, to free up your time? Because that's all we
Yeah,
have right now is time.
yeah.
And I'm realizing that as I get older and older, I've realized that I need to just shed the things that I'm not good at or I don't like doing.
Yeah, like there are some things that we can't outsource, unfortunately or
Yep.
fortunately. So,
100%.
going to the gym, for example, keeping yourself fit, you can't really
Yep.
outsource that. You can outsource other stuff though. You can outsource cooking and cleaning and all of that other
Yep.
great stuff that maybe you
And,
want
and
to
one
or
thing we
don't
know
want
about
to do.
the one thing we know about the workplace too is you cannot outsource leadership or management.
Uh-huh.
You like leaders and managers inside the organization like got to do the hard work to take care of their people and to make the workplace what it is. So
That's
there, yeah,
such a
you're
good
right.
point. Yeah, and
There's a lot of things we cannot outsource. We've got to just do
yeah,
the work ourselves.
yeah, that's such a good point because maybe then we're in organizations we're guilty of. Let's bring the consultants in. They'll have
Oh,
those difficult conversations. And if anyone's seen Office Space, I think I've talked about Office Space on
yeah.
this podcast before. It's like they bring the consultants in to have those difficult conversations instead of having those difficult conversations themselves. For anyone who hasn't watched Office Space, yeah, it's one of my cult classic
Brilliant
favorites from
movie.
1999. Definitely
Okay.
go and check it out. But Brandon, what would you say? Like, what have you learned either as a podcaster? So that's a very long time to be doing it.
hmm
Either as a podcaster, what have you learned? Or what are the evolutions that you've seen in the workplace or the kinds of things that people are talking about spanning that time?
Yeah. You're right. It's a long time. I was thinking about this earlier, and I've reflected on it recently, where in a lot of ways, like the HR profession in the workplace has changed a lot. And in a lot of ways, it hasn't. So what I mean by that is like I think HR professionals' job, like of compliance and just the things that make people operations work, is not changing. It's like compliance is getting more like, especially in the United States, like it's getting more and more intense, especially when you think about each state and local, depending on where you're at. Pandemic thrust us into a whole different area too, where like now, like we've got a lot of our consultants who are taking care of their companies across different industries, and they have employees all over the place. And so now they're having to like learn state and local laws, federal laws. And so those things aren't going away. They're just getting like more intense. And then you got this whole other movement of like taking care of our people, psychological safety,
Mm.
well-being at work. And in 2012, I was not talking about those things. And I don't know
Yeah.
if that was just a product of where I was at or if that was a product of employers were not ready to have that conversation yet.
Mm.
So there's two things happening. I think is like the administration of just people is not going away.
Yeah.
That's staying put and getting harder and harder as the legal space gets more complicated. And and then you've got this like taking care of our people and
Mm.
fighting for talent. And so like, people are seeking workplaces where they're going to get what they need. You've talked about it when you were on my podcast about these pillars of the human needs and
Mm.
the baseline of psychological safety. Like those are things that employees are seeking. And that's the hard work that I'm seeing done. And those are the conversations I'm having about like, and I'm trying to get deep into some of these areas of like, well, how do we actually do it? Because I think it's easy to talk about these things, but putting it to practice,
Yeah.
especially when you're an in-house solo, I mean, I'm talking a lot of small businesses. So like as a solo HR person inside of a company, it's hard to do all these things
Yeah.
and especially influence the leaders to do them.
Yeah.
So
Well, this was something I was going to ask about. So, this idea of the admin getting more complex over time, and then this new philosophy, let's say, of taking care of people and employee well-being, like to me, they're two completely different
Yeah.
task buckets, if you want to call them that, and probably carried out by two very different people. But if you are the only person in the organization, if you're the sole person who's actually taking care of all this stuff, it's quite difficult to manage both, because I
Yeah.
can imagine on the one hand this is becoming so complex it could take over your entire role, but then how do you find the time on the other hand to make sure that employees are being looked after?
Right. Yeah, I think that's in any organization, small or large, that's going to be the problem is like we've got all these redundant tasks that need to be taken care of. And is that amount of work going to cloud the rest of the stuff that we need to do? It's probably more important and more strategic in nature. So yeah, like I think as a solo HR person, you're probably trying to figure out like, well, am I the one that's got to do all this, or should I find a vendor partner or a technology that can do all this and streamline it? To free myself up to do something that's bigger and better and is going to make a bigger impact in the workplace. And I think even like you probably, I know you worked inside global organizations and talked to a lot of people in global organizations. They're probably thinking the same thing. They're probably thinking like, the administration of our people operations is getting so intense. How can we create an artificial intelligence bot that can do some of these things that we used to have, coordinator level or generalist level HR professionals do? So that's how it's evolving. I think we're sort of looking at what's highest and best use. It's totally an economics game. It's we only have time and we need to spend time on the most important things, which tends to be, and in my opinion, is it's the human connection piece.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
up leveling our people, coaching them, getting them what they need, making sure that from a well-being perspective that they're going through something at home and they're still coming to work and they may have 80% in the tank, and just being there for them, to help them through whatever that they're going through, to make sure that hey, we could still be productive and reach our goals and have opportunities. And that's the hard work of leaders, I think.
Yeah, I think this idea of productivity is an interesting one, and we can get wrapped up so much in the I must be productive all the time. And I saw something recently that was like, if you have 80% in the tank and you give 80% that day, then you've given 100%. Like
100%.
there's no
Yeah.
two ways about it. That if you're not at 100%, then you can't give 100%. And so you shouldn't even try to do that. And I've just recently started reading Fierce Self Compassion, something that's been on my
Mm.
list for a long time, but I'm learning about what it means to be self compassionate, because I think I give myself personally a really hard time if I don't get stuff done. So it's kind of learning that like it's okay if some of these things don't get done, or if it's okay that these things don't work out, and showing yourself kindness in the way that you would show other people kindness as well. Any
I
thoughts
love that.
around
Yeah. I love that. I think getting other people to buy into that's going to be a lot harder. More for like if the contributor level people, if they want to show up at 80% and that's 100% for them, like making sure that they work inside of an environment where that's okay. Because I think a lot of people are like, well, I just can't show up at all if I can't bring my best. And I
Okay.
in a lot of yeah, I don't know. I mean, I love that philosophy though. I think that's where we need to head as a society, as a work environment. But getting leaders to buy into that, I think, is the biggest challenge. I don't know what you think about that.
I think that's such an interesting one. And you alluded to it earlier, is how do we turn what we're talking about into a reality in organizations? What do you see as the big barriers to any of these initiatives kind of evolving? So, workplace well-being, talking about psychological safety, talking about our needs at work, self-compassion. Like, what do you see as the big blockers? And this can be from your own experience or from people who've been on your podcast. Any insights to share around how do we take this from we're just talking about it to
Yeah.
now we're living it?
Well, that's a big question. I think there's probably a lot of factors at play. I
Mm,
think the beliefs that have run through us forever, and old leadership styles that
Yeah.
probably just hasn't gone away. So like what I mean by that is at one point I was an entry level employee and I had managers that I looked up to, and they had a certain leadership philosophy, and some of that you absorb right into your own philosophy. Whether it's like you saw that, okay, they're a micromanager, and that's not how I want to be treated, or like they were not kind at all,
Yeah.
and I want to be a kind. So like it can work in a way that's like I don't want to be like that at all, and here's how I want to be as a leader when I get to that point. So I think some of the barriers are just this rooted, ingrained in us, these old leadership habits that just won't go away. And I think
Mm.
these new leaders, the this millennial group, and then Gen Z will eventually become leaders. I think the evolution's happening, and we can see it in the workplace as millennials are taking over businesses. They're owning businesses. They're executive level positions, and I think they all along they wanted this. Um, they wanted psychological safety in the workplace. They wanted, uh, kindness and empathy and emotional intelligence. Like we're talking about a lot of this stuff. So I think it's slowly happening, but getting there's a little hard because that old regime is not, it's still ingrained in a lot of these workplaces. I
Yeah.
don't know if you've seen that too, but that to me is like one of the biggest barriers other than
Mm.
just the day-to-day work. The firefighting, the urgency of just the work itself is getting in the way of us focusing on like how do we make workplaces better and
Yeah.
focus on some of these things that are, softer, they're more, I guess, fluffy in the eyes of some executive leaders.
Yeah, I think, I mean, one of the first things I will say about that is oftentimes we think that it's additional time that we need to take to practice these things, but it's not. It's really just a change in your behaviors and how you approach the work that you're already doing, how you show up differently, and catching yourself in the moment to be like, oh, am I telling someone here or am I coaching? Sometimes it's just
Yeah.
easier and faster to tell someone what to do, but the benefits in the longer term of coaching someone through their own issues means that they're not going to keep coming to you and relying on you. They will feel a
Right.
sense of achievement and self-efficacy that they can do things themselves. And so I think that's a big thing. I think you're so right in terms of the old leadership, and you use three different words which I jotted down, which I love: styles, philosophy, and habits. And I think all three encapsulate exactly what it is that we're dealing with. And it could also be not that they don't want that, but they didn't have that. So role modeling and leadership, I think, is so, so important. And just as you were talking, I was reflecting like, how did things like well-being come in to the workplace? If I think back, like my image of workplaces gone by would be something like out of Mad Men, where you wouldn't dream of talking about that kind of thing at work. And how did it start creeping its way in? Or, there has to be some benefit to it of creating well-being at work in order for organizations, to start paying attention to this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So I think it's important to acknowledge that there are these really strong monetary benefits, not just like, oh, fluffy, let's everyone be happier at
Yeah.
work. There are monetary benefits to be had: higher profitability. I was talking to someone earlier on the podcast about the book of accounts, or I think I can't remember the exact terminology that was used, but it's like having your own business and you need to grow that business. And what if you took these same frameworks and applied them to your relationships with your customers? The same thing would
Yes.
apply. You need to look after well-being. You need to look after them as an individual. You need to actually care about them and not just in it for the money.
Yeah. That's so profound too. I think back and when you're talking and saying something like some of these things are so basic. And I remember when I 22 years old and I started reading all these like self-help books. And one of the books I picked up was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And it's so silly, right? Like, I don't know if you've read it, but there's so many chapters that are just simple things like smiling or asking questions or getting people what they want. And a lot of times, like those things translate, as a leader and as a manager to do these things for your people, those make a big impact. And I imagine when we started talking about well-being at work, it was because manager one-on-ones started becoming more of a thing. I don't know if that was a thing pre 2000, I'm sure in some organizations that was pretty common. But we're talking about one-on-ones and the impact of those. And I imagine that a good leader is asking the right questions, and then an employee might open up and say, this thing's going on at home right now,
Mm,
and I might not have the best. Yeah, I might be 80%, like we were talking about earlier, and then they might ask another follow-up question about like, well, tell me more about that, like what's going on, and then there's the empathy that you now have for that employee, and just like the under level of understanding of where we're at, like we started opening up a little bit more, and I think
mm.
when employees have that experience, they start talking about it, and then it puts pressure on employers to start acting a certain way. And I just think we're opening up the conversation because managers and leaders opened up the doors for
Yeah.
employees to talk.
Yeah,
That
that's
was my
interesting.
experience.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it like that, but yeah, the one-on-ones that I hadn't, you just kind of take it for granted if you've come into the
Yeah.
workplace since the year 2000, which I have. But if I even think back to well-being at work and what that meant when I still worked at corporate, it was a well-being week that we did once a year,
A
and they
week.
brought a week, 1 week in the year, and it was usually at a really like busy time, and they would pick it. We had a busy part of the month, let's say, and if if they didn't get input from people, the people who were organizing the events, because it was various different events over the week, it would fall on a time where it was like, this is not a good time. Like everyone in the operations team is going to be super busy. Everyone in the client service team is going to be super busy. So like not a good time to have it this week. But they would bring in various different speakers through our
Mm.
employee, what's it called? The employee, there's like a word for it, EPA or something like that. Basically our insurance company had
Oh,
people, and
EAP.
they EAP, they would bring in I don't know how I forgot that name. They would bring in people to speak about various different things
Yeah.
relating to health. And I think we did a breathing exercise, we did yoga. And the big irony for me always was people just don't have the time. They just do
Right.
not have the time to take an hour out of the day to go and to do some yoga practice or to go and to do some breathing. Now, I did get involved in it because I knew how important it was even then. Um, but for me, it is coming back to this idea of time. Is that something that comes up on your podcast? Like
Yeah.
before we even think about well-being, we have to think about people's workload, and is that another trend that you're seeing? Like we're busier than
Yeah.
ever, basically.
Oh, yes. In fact, I recorded a podcast the other day about busyness. I'm trying to remember the exact title of the book. But it was just like a lot of people are wearing the busyness as a badge of honor. And that
Yes.
is toxic, in
Yeah.
my opinion. Is if you
Totally
see
agree.
leaders running around saying like how busy I am, and it, like when people say like, how are you doing, Aoife? And if you responded with like, "Oh, I'm
Busy.
so busy," but
Yeah.
and you have a smile on your face, how do you think that's going to make people
Yeah.
feel?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in my opinion, the biggest work we need to do is like not only just optimizing our own time and buying time back in some way, but as leaders and supervisors, managers, people who impact other people, we need to start walking the talk. We need to
Mm.
start doing breathing exercises um, every couple of hours and talking about it openly, like, or I
Yeah.
went on a walk, and just sharing that publicly, or
Mm.
I'm blocking out 2 hours for deep work, and just sharing that we're doing those things, and then
Yeah.
hopefully our employees start to realize like, oh, this is normal, like
Yeah.
to to focus or to do breathing exercises, or to focus on my mental health. We're going to all be more productive because of it.
Yeah, it goes back to that idea of being a role model, but also there is a term for this called working out loud, and it's when you share what it is you're doing. I'm leaving early today because I'm going to watch my daughter play football. I'm taking it 2 hours. I'm blocking my calendar, do not disturb for 2 hours because I'm focusing on deep work. I'm doing this big project and I'm getting into the zone. I've gone out for a walk to do a bit of breathing because I was getting really stressed. And I know if I just get out into nature, then it's going to calm me down. I was that person who was like, I'm really busy. And
Yeah.
what I did was I planned everything. So I had weeks and weeks in advance. I'd have my weekends blocked up. This was obviously wasn't with work, but it was with social stuff. And like the wake up call for me was a friend said to me, "Oh, you're always so busy." And
Hmm.
I was like, "Oh my God, I did not mean to give that impression. Like I'm so busy that I don't have time for friends, that I don't have time to have a chat or anything like that." That was a huge wake up call for me. And from then, I stopped planning so much stuff and I kept space open. Like I wanted to have, it was probably a control thing. I wanted to have everything planned out into the future. And now my partner these days, he's not a planner. He's a last minute, which drives me around the bend, I have to say. But I'm learning to cope. I'm learning to cope with it. But I'm gone almost the opposite now. I'm gone a bit closer to him. Not that I would be very last minute. Like I do need to know stuff in advance so that I can plan and whatnot. But that whole busyness thing of I'm wearing busyness like I'm so proud to be busy because being busy means I'm super important, and being important
Right.
is meaningful to me, and people will think I'm brilliant, and whatever you associate with being busy and being important, it's like it's not. And I think the dialogue needs to change on this to be more like busy means that you either don't have enough support in your role, in which case you need to ask for more support and need to get more people on your team, or it means that you can't handle the work, or it means that you're being such a perfectionist and a control freak that you're putting in way longer hours than what you actually should be doing. And you could be spending that time with family or doing a hobby or doing something else. Sorry, my TED talk is over now. My rant is over.
It's a great TED talk because I totally align with it. I'm notorious for also planning out. I'm sure you handle this too, where you schedule like meetings or even podcast interviews so far out, and then the week you're looking at your calendar and you see it's all completely filled with things that you scheduled a long time ago, and you're like, why did I do that to myself? I've recently been a lot better about saying no to things. I've also opted out of meetings that I know I don't need to be a part of, where I can just probably get notes or something after
Yeah.
the fact and let other people lead the meetings. I've even removed podcast interviews that I don't need on my calendar anymore. Like it's not a fit, or
Yeah.
I just decided to go a different way with it. And so I'm trying to be thoughtful about that. And because that's all we have is our time. And now we
Mm.
have these amazing tools to help streamline what we're doing. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
about you, but with AI and some of these automated tools now, I'm able to do so much more with less. Now, in our like high producing society, though, that also could mean we find ways to do things faster, but then we're still going to fill in the time that we saved with even more
Exactly.
productive things. So I
Yeah.
worry about that is
Yeah.
like we get so productive that we're just doing more and more and more and more and
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
work, and it's never going to stop. What do you think about that? Because that's I worry about that big time.
Are you familiar with Tara McMullen?
Mm-mm.
She has, what's the name? It's called what? Oh, her name will come to me, and she's just done a huge revamp of her website. I know that, but I'll put a link in the show notes. But she's a brilliant. I think she calls herself a philosopher. Like she's a brilliant philosopher about all things like this. But and I love her newsletters. Like they're super long, but they're so engaging and so thought provoking. But one of them was, I think it was called the egg beater dilemma. So, hey, you used to beat eggs by hand, and that took however long it took to whisk eggs or to make a meringue, whatever. I don't even remember what it was for. But now we have egg beaters, and that saves us a ton of time. And
Yeah.
it's the same with the washing machine. You used to wash clothes by hand. Now you have a washing machine to do that for you. Dishwashers as well. So you have all of these time-saving things. Microwaves, um,
Yes. Air
toasters,
fryers now.
all of that.
I
Air
love my air
fryers,
fryer.
all of these things. The air fryer trend is real.
Oh, it's ridiculous. You know you've made it when you have an air fryer. No, I'm just
I
kidding.
didn't have an air fryer for a long time, but I recently bought one, so I'm loving it, I have to say.
Good.
Now, um, and so I've made it. That's my badge of honor. But her whole thing is that we've created all of this additional time, but exactly that. How are we filling it? We're doing more productive
Yeah.
stuff. And let's maybe break that open a little bit more. And it's this idea of the busy work or the busy tasks and the things that make us feel really busy because they make us feel good. Because, and again,
Yeah.
Dory Clark, dropping all the names here, Dory Clark has a brilliant TED talk. I think it's a TED talk where she's talking about this idea of busyness because it feels good to be busy. It feels like we're being
Oh
productive.
yeah.
But actually, if we're not working on those right things, then it's kind of pointless. Going back to what we spoke about earlier, it's better to have that time, the idle time of doing nothing, than working on something that's like, why am I actually doing this? And I'm not saying this from a really preachy way because I fall into this trap all the time where I'm doing
Me
stuff and
too.
then I'm like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's a case of, again, going back to this idea of intentionality. Let's be more intentional about the work that we're actually doing. What are we here to achieve? This brings in the role of leadership to really clarify what are the really important things. And I remember hearing something not so long ago that the word priority is actually a singular. It's not a plural. It shouldn't be used in the plural because by its very definition, it just means one thing. So we can't have multiple priorities. You need to have just one priority. So if you get one thing done today, what is that one thing? That is your one priority. And you can complete that priority and then have another one, but you can't have multiple priorities at the same time. Again,
Yeah.
I've gone off another rant
Yeah.
here.
Do you like vulnerability? Do you want me to be vulnerable for you?
Go
Because
for it.
one of the things I'm this is bringing up a lot of thoughts about where I'm at in my life right now. So like I've learned to harness a lot of technology's been my thing forever. I've always done more with less because of tech and self-proclaimed geek. So at my full-time job at Xenium, I'm finding ways to do things faster, better, things that I used to be manual, like kind of like this egg beater theory that we were talking about. And so I've been able to like just do so much more. Well, even on my personal side, I do some freelance marketing work, and I've gotten faster and better, and people have wanted me, and so I've come said yes to everything, and I've basically created two full-time jobs for myself, leaving zero space for reading, for a lot of exercise, and it's just a product of like this need of probably being wanted and this high productive feeling, and I love that feeling. It's almost like a high of some way. But I used to read 60 books a year and just immerse myself into just different like I'm very curious, but I'm leaving no space for myself with that. And so
Yeah.
I'm sharing that because I'm aware of it, and I hope others can be aware of their tendencies as well, because this is a societal problem. I think is
Yeah.
like financially, especially in the United States. I don't know what it's like where you're at, but costs are rising
Yeah.
significantly. And so we're always chasing like more money and more productivity. And it's like, when does it end? We're not leaving space for the priorities that you were talking about,
Yeah.
or just the space to think critically. So anyways, I share that. I've got a lot of work to do.
But no, it's brilliant and it's so relatable. And I am sorry to hear that there are a few things that have come up for me while you're saying that. And one of them is I've just started listening on audio to a book called Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It.
Mm,
And one thing that I don't know if it explicitly said this, but it was like kind of a light bulb moment for me that anytime you embark on something new and you reach a specific goal and then you've reached the goal and you're like, oh, now I can relax because I've reached the goal. And
right.
I've been aware for a long time that it's not about the goals, it's about the systems and the habits that you have. But in this book, it was like, it's okay if that happens. That's normal. And here's a multitude of reasons for that to actually happen. And it was like, oh my God, this guy's giving me permission to be human and
Yes.
to fall off the wagon as such. So I loved that point from that book. I've only recently started listening to it, and that just really hit home for me. Is with all good intentions, it's okay to talk about this stuff. And it's funny because people say to me, oh, you
Yes.
have it all figured out, or you talk
No.
about this stuff all the time. Hello, I'm human as well.
We're
So
human.
I am foul. I do mess things up, or I do like fall off the wagon. Is the only area that I can kind of think of describing it, that you try and do something for a while, you succeed at it, and then it's like it all goes tits up basically.
That,
But
yeah, and like, one thing I'll just, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but like the one thing I wanted to share, like inside of organizations, if we can be human like that and share our faults and the mistakes that we make, and we share that publicly,
yeah,
that is a sign of a psychologically safe work environment.
totally.
And other people are likely to do that. And we can actually share more about the mistakes we're making and probably
Yeah,
never make them again. And that's how we get better,
yeah,
to share openly.
yeah,
Anyways, finish
yeah.
your thought.
Well, before I go on to that thought, I want to build on this psychological safety idea that in a lot of places that I've worked that hasn't existed, and the opposite of psychological safety is the gossip and the blame and the why didn't this get done, and the stuff that I see on social media, the stuff that friends share with me about how their bosses treat them. Like, it's the complete and utter opposite of psychological safety. And if we can just have permission to be like that, and again, psychological safety is something that's come up so much on the podcast. There are so many previous episodes. In one specific episode, Duana Blomstrom, she was talking about, like, we always think psychological safety has to come from the top, but what if you as an individual decided, I want to create a psychologically safe team? I'm going to start opening up a bit more about what's going on for me. I'm going to start sharing my mistakes. I'm going to start asking people questions. It's not going to happen overnight, but if you
Right.
start sharing what's going on, oh yeah, I tried that and it didn't work out, and when I was in your role, I was felt like such an imposter. It was such a scary time. And so if you're feeling like that, then it's okay. Just so you know, all of these kinds of things really help people to make them feel like I'm not alone in this and what's
Yeah.
going on for me. The other point I was going to make was on another book, and I read 60 books last year, but realized
Ooh.
that was too many. I was like,
Oh,
that's
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 great.
intense. So I've
It is
set a
hard to
goal.
absorb all of that information, though.
I'm like, if ChatGPT could read all of these books for me, put it into my
Yep.
brain. No, I do enjoy it, and I do make time for reading every evening before I go to bed, and I make a bit of time on the weekends as well. And I listen on audio, which makes a difference if I'm out for a walk, all of those kinds of things. But one book that I read a number of years ago, and I have it in physical and I have it here with me in Tenerife as well, I'm going to reread it, is a book called Enough. And it goes back to your earlier point of, when is enough enough? You didn't probably say that, but you were like, there's the cost of living crisis. I notice it when I go to the supermarket, and you don't think that you've bought that much more, but actually when
Oh
you're going
yeah.
to pay at the checkout, the numbers are a lot higher than they used to
And there's
be.
package inflation as well, like the shrinking packages and the same price.
Shrinkflation, I think they call
Yep.
it. Yeah,
It's a real thing.
what used to be 200 is now 150, but you're still paying the same price, or maybe slightly lower. So you think I'm getting a better deal, but actually, it's 50%. It's 25% less, but actually, it's only 10% less price. But yeah, the book Enough, and it goes into these various different things. When is, and it talks about enough food, it talks about enough money, it talks about enough, and this sense of enoughness and feeling enough. And I just want to reread it because I think it's so important, because you have to decide, where does it end? When will I know? And this also
Mm.
brings to mind, as I'm speaking, how I initially got into podcasting. And you were saying 2012, I think it was 2013, I started listening to podcasts. And I was listening to Gretchen Rubin's podcast called Happier.
Yeah.
Huge fan. And she talks about this concept of, like, say if you're rich, like, when do you become rich? You keep adding a coin and adding a coin and adding a coin. Where's the balance between rich and not rich? I was like, oh my God, it's such an interesting concept. It's giving me
Yeah.
goosebumps now just talking about it. But if you keep adding a coin and a coin and a coin, and it's much easier to visualize, I think, if it's a coin, keep adding a coin. When do you reach the level that you're rich? And when do you have enough money?
That you're bringing up a great point. I often think back to lives in such a like perfectionist culture, or where we're striving for perfection, but like we often don't go back and see where we came from. And if you look back in the time where it was, you were rich if you had a washer and dryer or a microwave or the color TV, those things are abundant now. And so
Yeah.
if you think about we're actually getting rich as a society, but we never really stop and appreciate some of those things.
So true.
And so we keep building on that because we're striving for perfect or a
Mm,
perfectly safe culture or
yeah.
and I think that's in a lot of ways I like it because we're building on something before it and we're getting better. But your point, when is it enough?
Mm,
When can we
yeah.
just chill out? When can
Yeah.
we just say that I'm good?
Yeah.
I'm rich enough or I'm happy enough, but
Yeah.
I just don't think most people operate that way.
Yeah, I think we have a tendency again as a society to compare ourselves to other people and what we see on social
Yes.
media, which very often is the highlight reel. Like I have this podcast, I talk to amazing people on it, but people don't share the behind the scenes of what's actually going on in my life. I try to be
Yeah.
authentic and vulnerable to a degree, but it's a level of vulnerability that is professional vulnerability as opposed to here, let me tell you my life story and let me tell you everything that's going on. So what we see out there and we compare our inner world with what's going on the outside for other people, I think it makes it hard. But I think what really helps, and again, I'm not great at this, I'm great at talking about it, but I'm not great at practicing it, is gratitude. That really, really helps to say, what am I actually grateful for? Like, what am I grateful for in my life? What am I grateful for? What's going on for me right now? All of this kind of stuff. It helps us to make those other things go away.
It's so true. I need to be better about, at night, say the three things that were great today and just
Mm.
appreciate those little things. I do some work for an author speaker who wrote a book called What's Going Well, and the whole idea was like just ask, your colleagues or your partner or whomever, like what's going well, and then that opens up the door for them to share something that they're grateful for or something
Mm.
that went well during the day or went well this year or whatever it is. And then so if we just keep focusing on gratitude, I think we build great cultures, we build good relationships, we internalize that gratitude a little bit more and probably be a little bit more happy because I do appreciate what you just said about like the social media and just how
Mm.
toxic that can be of the highlight reel and comparison. It's very dangerous. There's a book that I'm listening to. Maybe you already have. It's the Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
I have, of
just
course, heard of it, and I can't find it on Spotify. It's not out on Spotify yet, and
oof,
I don't use Audible, and it's not on
yeah.
Spotify yet.
So yeah, I use Audible. I'm listening to that right now. I'm almost done with it, but just thinking through like we so often want to control other people and their behaviors and are
Yeah,
so
if
frustrated
only
by
they
what
would
they're doing.
change, Brandon. If only they
If
would
only they would
change.
change. And we can't change people. We
Yeah, yeah,
can
yeah.
we can perhaps guide them and coach them to change, but they've got to change for themselves. And so the whole theory is like, just let them
Yeah.
do what they're gonna do. We can't control them, but let me like I
Mm,
have agency around what I can control
yeah.
in my life. And so making those decisions and just focusing on what I can control is probably going to make us a little bit more happier.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. And that brings us nicely on to the question that I ask everyone who comes on the podcast. What does being happier at work mean to you?
Being happier at work means belonging. It means being productive, meeting my goals while also doing it with people I really enjoy being around. I've been fortunate enough to work inside of an organization for over 16 years, and say I have probably three or four best friends inside the organization. And part of the reason I have stayed so long is just the doing doing things and reaching goals and doing it with people you actually enjoy and you care about. That's a special kind of organization and what makes me happy.
Brilliant. I love that. And if people want to reach out, if they want to connect and find out more about what you do, what's the best way they can do that?
LinkedIn, I'm pretty active. You're going to see a lot of like business oriented stuff. Instagram, I'm open. So if you want to connect with me there, you'll see both my professional stuff, but also a lot of personal stuff too. So those are good places to reach me. Transform Your Workplace is the podcast. So you can find it on Apple, Amazon Music, Spotify, or if you just Google it, you'll find it and find my work.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. I so enjoyed this conversation. I think it's so needed that, it's bringing that humanity. It's an open conversation about what needs to change, but also a recognition that we're all human and change is hard and sometimes we don't get it right.
Aoife, it has been such a pleasure to have me on your show. I appreciate you bringing me
Thank
on.
you.